So navigating the maze of lettings legislation. So we're going to go through what's coming up first to what's going to be slightly further away. Everything that I'm going to speak about today will be coming in the next 2, if not 5 years, new government dependent. So we are going to be keeping an eye on that as well. It's things that you're probably aware of, and obviously you will be aware and probably looking forward to the white paper part, which is probably the biggest bit of legislation that is going to be coming in the next few years. I've sat through the 84-page document to get that right. So hopefully I've got some good information for you on that one. So first thing that we're going to come up with is the smoke and carbon monoxide alarms. So this is the current law at the moment, and it is changing slightly. So at the moment, as I'm sure you're all aware, you do need to have a smoke alarm, on each floor. And a CO2 alarm where there's any sort of fuel burning appliance, so an open fire or oil boiler. And it's your landlord's responsibility to test alarms on the first day of the tenancy and alarm the tenant's responsibility to maintain. So that's the current law at the moment, which I'm sure you're all aware of. And then I'll just go through now what will be coming in. This wants to work for me. Why are you now not working? There we go. So smoke and carbon monoxide updates the regulations. These are coming in on the 1st of October this year. So it's really important that we are prepared for this well before this date, because you don't be rushing around on the 30th of September. So you've got 2 months in reality to get this sorted. So there must be a carbon monoxide alarm in all rooms of fixed combustion appliance, e.g. a gas boiler or hob, that excludes a gas cooker. We're waiting on clarity for what a gas cooker actually is. So what are the government saying is a gas cooker? So is it a freestanding, old style gas cooker with light up burners? Is it just a gas hob? So we're waiting on clarification for that. The reason why we think they're saying you don't have to have it if you've got a gas cooker is the likelihood is there's going to be a boiler in the kitchen. So you're going to have a carbon monoxide alarm anyway, but that leaves a little thin. So that's where we are waiting on clarification, which will come out probably very close to the 1st of October, which is slightly annoying, but the government like to do everything last minute. But once we've got that, obviously we can confirm. It is the landlord's responsibility to test on the first day of the tenancy, like it was before. What has changed, and you must repair or replace if there is any fault throughout the tenancy. So we're looking at clarity of what is a fault, so what classes as faulty. So we would like that clarification from the government. It is still the tenant's responsibility to replace the batteries, and it is still their responsibility to test throughout the tenancy. But it's your responsibility to test on that first day of the tenancy. And if a tenant reports it as faulty, then you must repair. We're also going to be awaiting clarification for if there is this problem with a smoke or carbon monoxide alarm, what is the guideline for the timeline that it has to be sorted in? The government normally block maintenance issues into certain blocks, so 7 days, 14 days, 28-day response. We're expecting it to probably be 7 days, as it's a pretty important area that needs to be covered there, pretty important. If your smoke alarm's not working, that needs to be sorted. But again, that's what we are waiting for clarification on. So that's the next big bit that's going to be coming in there. And we're just going to look into some bits on the bear in mind section with this law now. So where must alarms be installed? So smoke alarm must be on a ceiling, on every floor, and a carbon monoxide alarm, this is quite fun, should be fitted at head height. Height is very different to say my husband's head height. He's a foot taller than me. So there is not really clarity just at the moment, and they're saying head height. So what that is generally saying is if I've got a boiler in a kitchen, it should be within 1 to 3 meters of that appliance, and we will put it on top of the kitchen unit because that's classed as close enough to the appliance. But again, we're waiting definite clarification, which they will release closer to the 1st of October. Of exactly where they want these carbon monoxide. So we know it's going to be between 1 and 3 meters. They've said head height at the moment. But we would obviously like clarification on what head height actually means, because that's going to be very different for different people. I always get asked what constitutes a floor. So obviously normally in a standard house, you've got your ground floor and your first floor. So that's quite simple. Where it gets difficult is where you've got, say, a few steps up to another room. So I've got a 3-bedroom property in Plymouth at the moment. It's got a ground floor. You go up a flight of stairs to the 2nd bedroom and a bathroom, and then up 6 stairs-ish to another 2 bedrooms. Now, I've asked the landlord to install 3 smoke alarms there, because essentially that is 3 floors, because if there's a fire in that 2nd bedroom, it's going to take a long time for that smoke to get all the way up to the other part where the main bedroom is. If you've got a basement in a property, you would have to install under a basement, because that is classed as a floor. Same again, if you've got a maisonette flat, so you go in at ground floor level and you've literally sort of got an entrance hallway with stairs going up, you would need a smoke alarm at the bottom by that front door and at the top, because that constitutes 2 floors. So that's where you would need them. Another interesting point is, I didn't always realize this, but there are use by dates on smoke and carbon monoxide alarms, a bit like your food, but obviously these use by dates are longer. What we're waiting for clarity on with that is, if a use by date has passed, that is probably going to class an alarm as faulty, so the landlord's going to have to replace it. So it is worth checking now what the dates are on your alarms. Are they in date, or are they up for renewal soon? So you can make sure that you're getting those replaced. A smoke alarm is going to cost you £10 to £20 max. For a battery one, not much more expensive if they're hardwired, and a carbon monoxide is normally slightly less. So not expensive things to have to be replacing. So it's not going to cause a huge amount of issues if you use by dates up, so it's not going to be an expensive job. There's been a lot of talk about battery alarms not being acceptable. They are acceptable. In England, battery smoke alarms are fine. Where you may have an issue is if you've got a purpose-built block of flats. All those alarms have to be linked. So if the alarm's going off in flat 2, it also goes off in flats 1, 3, 4, 5 and 6, or whatever there is there, because obviously if there's a fire in the building, everybody needs to get out. So where you have got a block of flats like that, or perhaps you've got a flat above a shop, especially if it's a commercial food premises like a fish and chip shop, those alarms are definitely going to need to be interlinked and hardwired, because if there's a fire in the chip shop below, your tenants in the flat above need to know about that. But battery alarms in standard residential properties, residential houses, are absolutely fine. You don't need to be hardwiring them in. As I said before, tenants are still responsible to change batteries and tests. So your tenants should be testing their smoke alarms regularly, as we all should in our own homes. And if it's just a case of the batteries, or they should be checking the batteries first anyway. And we would always ask that if the tenant called into us, have they changed the batteries first? If they've changed the batteries, or it's hardwired and it's still faulty, then obviously you need to get an electrician out to look at that. With our tenancies here at Complete, on our inspections, our managed properties every 3 to 6 months, we do take out the little pokey sticks that the fire service gave out when the first laws came in 2015, and we do test those smoke alarms on each inspection for you. So that is covered, because with respect, I'm sure not every tenant is testing their smoke alarms regularly, so we are making sure those are getting tested so we can report back to you. So in a nutshell, that is the smoke and carbon monoxide alarm legislation that's coming in. Obviously, space for question and answers at the end if you need to on that one. Next one that's coming in, EPC regulations. I'm sure you've heard a lot about this. This is all part of the government's initiative to make us greener. So from the 1st of April 2025, all new tenancies must have a rating of C or above, and the current law is E, and you probably remember a few years ago, all new tenancies had to be an E, and then all existing tenancies had to be an E. So it's now jumping up 2 ratings to a C, which is quite a significant jump. So it'll be all new tenancies on the 1st of April 2025, all new and existing tenancies on the 1st of April 2028. So if your tenants move out and you have new tenants going in after the 1st of April, you have to make sure it's a rating C. Same if you're renewing a tenancy. So that's classes as a new tenancy. If they're renewing onto a new contract, they're signing a new fixed term, you will have to do it. If it's periodic, you don't, because it's the same existing tenancy, it's just rolling. But if they're signing for a new 6 or 12 months, you would have to make sure that it was a C or above. So the updates to regulations, there's really pretty much the same apart from the levels. What they've also changed though is the money side of things, which isn't great news. So the penalty for not having EPC at the moment is £5,000, and that's monitored by the local government. That will be rising to £30,000. So if you market your property with an out-of-date EPC, or your property doesn't have an EPC, the fine will be £30,000, and nobody wants £30,000 just for the sake of a document that costs about £90 to do. So we don't want anybody getting into that trap. The investment cap at the moment, so the investment cap is what you need to spend, and if you spend over that, then it means you can register for some exemptions. So the minimum investment cap at the moment is £3,500, but they are raising that to £10,000. So in order to, your property stays an E at the moment, and it's going to cost you £9,000 to get it to a C, you would have to do it. If it was going to cost you £11,000 to get to a C, you would have to do everything up to £10,000. And if that still only gets it to a D, you can then register exemption, but you would have had to have done everything up to £10,000 in order to register an exemption. So it's difficult in that case. It can, obviously, there are some cases where properties are restricted to improve, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But like I say, it's not, if it's going to cost me more than 10,000, I can't do it. You have to spend up to £10,000 in order to register that exemption. So it's quite a large amount of money that you're going to need to be spending. So it's worth starting to look at now, with this legislation obviously coming in from 2025 for new and 2028 for existing. So if you're having a new EPC, so EPCs are valid for 10 years. It's likely that at the moment your EPC could potentially be 9 years old or 5 years old. The regulations and how they measure for your EPCs changes all the time. So you may have a property at the moment that's a D, but it's only a few points off a C. And if you just did the new EPC, it might actually improve it up to a C already. So it's worth looking at. If yours is really close on the borderline, it is worth looking at. Sometimes it can drop it. We've had cases where when we went, you know, the first regulations came out to an E, we had some at a D, which we redid, and they went down to an E. So it can work both ways, but it is worth looking at. If yours is nearly there, sometimes the regulations change and it will just jump it up enough. So it is worth looking at. So in terms of what the look at your property, windows, obviously, are they double glazed, single glazed, wooden frame? Obviously double glazed, the newer, the higher their efficiency rating, the better they're going to be. Roofs, walls and insulation. So roof insulation is actually one of the cheapest things you can do to improve your energy rating. Wall insulation, they do like cavity wall insulation. They do look for that for EPCs. Love it or hate it, it is one of the things they rate on in a property. Quite obviously, boilers and heating systems. So gas central heating is obviously one of the highest ones there. There are newer renewable energy boilers which whack your rating up even higher. So it will look at, you know, your night storage heating, your electric panel heaters. It will look through that. Like I said, renewable energy systems, solar panels, absolutely fantastic. They're going to love solar panels. And again, if you've got these grain boilers, these new energy efficiency ones, they're going to come up really high on there. Lighting, simple things as LED light bulbs can change your rating. So it is worth considering that as well. Fireplaces, they will look at fires, open fires, wood burners, adding that in as well. And obviously the age of the properties, we're especially looking at the listed buildings. Listed buildings still have to have an EPC to be rented out. Like I said before, if you haven't got an EPC, you will incur that fine. So even if it's never going to get, it's a G at the moment, it's never going to get to an E, and it's going to cost you £20,000, whatever it's going to be, you still need to have that EPC. Yes, it is exempt, but it's not exempt under this law, so you would still have to have one. So top tips for improving your energy rating to get that through. So like I said, LED light bulbs. So they're only going to jump up a couple of points, but if you are borderline, so you're currently at a D, and you can jump up. If your EPC, when you get your EPC, it will show you on there what you can do to get it to the next levels. And LED light bulbs can sometimes be the simplest thing, and it will jump you up a rating. So it is worth reading through your current property's EPC to see what needs to be done, because if that's all it's going to take, then you'd be silly not to go around changing the light bulbs. Loft insulation, it bumps you up 5 points. So that again is not that expensive. It's got to be a certain mil, and I think it's got to be 175 mil now, is how hefty the lights. So you might have a little bit of loft insulation, needs to be thicker. That can improve and make that better for you. Insulate your hot water cylinder. So if you've got a hot water cylinder with no jacket around it, that can make that much better as well. Double glazing, obviously that comes up saying if you've got a single glazed property at the moment and it's not listed and you can put double glazing in, double glazing is going to jump you up 10 points. And replacing a boiler, obviously a big whack there at 40 points, but if you've got electrically heated property at the moment, you put a gas central heating boiler in there, that is going to jump you up a big 40 points. So that's going to probably jump you from an E to a C potentially, with some other little tweaks as well. So it is worth looking at. There are government grants coming out. There are government grants at the moment up to £4,000 for these renewable energy boilers. There is a link on our social media pages to find out if your property is eligible for that. Most properties are, so it is worth looking at if you need it. And I'll send the link out in the follow-up email from this also, so you can have a look if you're thinking that you might need to do that. Similarly, if you've got an EPC on your property and you're not sure what you would need to do to jump it up, I'm more than happy to look at it. Drop an email through with your EPC attached. Obviously, they're all available online, and we can have a look at what we would need to do and the potential spends to get it to that point as well. So we can do that for you. So the main thing at the moment, and what I'm talking to a lot of landlords about, is if they're thinking of investing. So when you're investing in property at the moment, what do we need to be doing? What do we need to be looking for? I'm sure some of you may be, you may not be, but you need to be checking that EPC rating before you view a property. If you're looking to buy your next buy to let at the moment, there is no point in going out there and buying a property at an EPC rating E if you're going to have to spend over £10,000 in the next few years to get it up for a C. It's not sustainable for you as a landlord. So do check that. Every property on the market has to have a valid EPC, whether that's for sale or for let. So it should always be in the marketing on Rightmove anyway. There should always be an EPC at the bottom. You can click on it and see what the rating is. So that's really important that you're checking that if you are considering investing now or in the future. So as well, obviously, we always talk to our landlords and our potential investors about investing in a new build. Obviously, we work very closely here at Complete with a lot of new build developers. So we're very sort of clued up on what their perks are. Now, obviously, new build properties potentially do cost more than a second-hand home. However, their EPC ratings are going to be coming out at A or a B easily. They're going to have all their smoke and normally carbon monoxide alarms installed, and they're going to be up to date with current building regulations. So if anything else comes in the next few years, your new build property should be there or thereabouts. So although, yes, it's going to cost you more money, it could actually save you 10 grand on your second-hand property because its EPC is all going to be up to date and ready. So they are worth considering if you are looking at investing and your budget is there, depending on what you're looking for, is looking at a new build property because it could save you money in the long run. They obviously also come with 2-year developer guarantee. So when you've bought them, so it's top of your NHBC 10-year guarantee for your major structural works, if anything goes wrong, they'll get 2-year guarantee with your developer. So that means you shouldn't have any maintenance costs apart from your usual gas safeties, etc., in those first 2 years, because that should be covered under your snagging with your developer. So if you are looking at investing, it really is worth considering. And if you are looking at all, please do let me know and I can put you in touch with our new homes team and see if we've got anything there for you. But just a top tip at the moment with the EPC regs coming in, especially, is to be having a think about new builds if you're thinking of investing, because they are going to tick all those boxes for you. So the next big one. So the white paper obviously came out a couple of weeks ago. A lot has changed since then in government, as I'm sure you're aware. So it isn't law yet. It is very likely that it is now going to take a lot longer than initially thought to become law. We are very likely, obviously, to have a new government quite shortly. And this was all agreed in the previous government. So it could it's not going to probably completely change, but it could change dramatically. Never say never. But obviously this got released, and then a few weeks later Boris has gone and there's potentially a new government coming in, so it could look very different. But I think it's really important for us to go through still, because a new government could put this up and say, well, we're this far along with it, we're going to do it anyway. It's taken them 2-3 years to get to this point, so it's taken a long stage just to release a white paper. So it's not going to be something that comes in imminently. It will be, our legal advisors are saying, at least 2 years. I'd never want to quote them on that normally, because if they suddenly turn around in a year's time and say it's coming in, we're all going to have to jump up and start acting. But it shouldn't be within the next, it should be after the next 2 years, potentially now even longer. So I would say in the next 2 to 5 years, we should expect these new bits of legislation to come in. The government have promised us 6 months notice of the changes, which does work quite nicely. 6 months is a good time to have to start some things, but obviously there's going to be a lot coming in here, and there's a lot that the government are going to have to do to get this up and running. So we're going to have a look at the 12-point plan that they put in place, what each of the 12 points means, what the government are going to implement, and what it looks like for yourselves as landlords and the lettings market overall, and then we can go from there. At the moment, these are not set in stone. So these are the guidelines that they're saying they're going to implement. So there are no specific, this is exactly how you have to do it, or this is 110% going to be the way. We will just go through exactly what they've put in that white paper, the 86 pages I had to read through and go through. And then obviously there will be clarification later. So 12 points to go through. So number 1 is the decent homes standards. So anybody who's ever dealt or worked in social housing may be quite familiar with this. So within social housing, there is a decent home standard that they have to work by. And that means that kitchens and bathrooms will have a certain lifeline. And they have to be of a certain standard and age is what's going to be coming in. So this is the government's policy to bring all housing up to certain standards. So what they're saying is, and we don't know what this looks like yet, that it may be that a kitchen has to be renewed every 10 years, a bathroom has to be renewed every 15 years, or something along those lines. They do it in social housing at the moment. Our property manager, Ellie, who works for us, she's got social housing background. She's very aware of how that works, and they have a budget put aside for certain housing, and every 5 years they put a new kitchen in, or whatever that looks like. We don't know the definite details of it yet, so what these standards are going to look like, but they are saying they're going to set out a set of decent home standards, so each home will have to adhere to this. At the moment, a property should be redecorated every 4 years. Carpets generally have a 7 to 10 year life, so we think it's going to work around that, but it's also going to include kitchens and bathrooms, and the age and the standard that they have to be. So we will find out more about that when they release that. Local council and their enforcement orders. So this one doesn't really affect us very much in Devon at the moment, but obviously, as you may be aware, there is mandatory licensing in other areas in the UK, like in Manchester. So they are giving local councils more authority to bring that in if they think it is needed. This will work very closely, I suppose, with the decent home standard and the HHSRS system, if you're aware of that at the moment, which is the health and safety rating system that councils and agents use when attending a property to make sure it's safe. So things like trips and falls from a height, damp and mold, excess cold, they'll be looking at that. And if they've got, an area of, low rate properties that aren't meeting decent home standards, they may bring in these enforcement orders and licensing. The government are giving local councils the ability to do that. Likelihood down here, because they're going to be targeting specific areas, it's more likely to happen in the cities, so Plymouth, Exeter, potentially likely. The government are saying they're targeting specific areas. They haven't notified us of what these specific areas are at the moment. I doubt it's going to be down in Little Devon, but you never know. But it's just something to bear in mind that licensing may come into place. Number 3. The big one, Section 21 notices are going to be abolished. So in the words of the white paper, they're going to introduce a simpler, more secure tenancy structure. So what this means, they're going to reform the grounds of possession, which I'll go on to shortly. And there's going to be one single system of periodic tenancies. So it will be the end of fixed term tenancies. There will be no more 6-month, 12-month, 24-month tenancies. Everyone will go onto a periodic rolling month-by-month tenancy. Now, similarly to the EPC regs, they're going to do that in 2 stages. So the first date, a bit like 1st of April 2025, will be all new tenancies, and then the next date, which will be 12 months later, will be all existing tenancies. Every single tenancy that is new at a certain point will just go into periodic, just start as a 1 month rolling contract, and a year later, all existing tenancies will proceed the same. So there will be no more fixed term guarantees for tenants or landlords. That's going to end. It will just be periodic tenancies. What they are changing is that a tenant will have to give 2 months notice of vacating a property. The government's comment behind that was that they are then reducing the landlord's void periods because they're making tenants give more notice. Every tenant's going to have to give 2 months notice, so I'm not quite sure how that's going to work, because it will work the same as it being 30 days now. But it will be law that a tenant has to give 2 months notice if on a periodic tenancy. What it does mean is that tenant can give 2 months notice after month 1. So they can live there for a month, and then they can give you 2 months notice and they can vacate. So it is stopping that security level that you currently have with your 6 or 12 month fixed term tenancies. It was a bit of a shock, this one coming in, because we obviously thought after government and shelter and other people sort of campaigned for these lifetime tenancies, these minimum 3 year tenancies, to suddenly bring this in. They are saying that tenants need to have more flexible tenancies. They need to be able to leave a property if the standards don't meet legislation and what it should be set. So that's why they're going down to periodic tenancies. And obviously they're abolishing the Section 21 orders, but they are reforming the possession procedure, which I will get onto next. So everything will be a periodic tenancy that will be done over 2 dates. So the first date will be all new tenancies. Second date will be all existing tenancies. A tenant will have to give you 2 months notice to vacate. They can give that to you after month 1, or they give that to you further down the line, whenever it is. It doesn't matter how long they've been there, it will have to be 2 months, but they can give you that notice after month 1. So that's what's happening with Section 21s in the tenancy structure. So reforming the Section 8 process. So this is where some better news comes in. So the Section 8 process at the moment is a lot more stricter and quicker than the Section 21 process. Obviously with Section 21s, you don't have to give a reason for serving notice. With the Section 8, you would have to do your grounds, the mandatory or discretionary grounds, for why you want to serve a Section 8. We normally serve them through solicitors because they can be very complicated when going against a mandatory or discretionary ground. So the good news is you can still evict a tenant if you are selling the property or if you want to move a close family member in. So what we're waiting for the government to confirm is what constitutes a close family member. Does it have to be son or daughter, wife, parents, or can it be cousins, aunts, uncles? We're waiting on that. There is no mention of friends. At the moment, it says close family member. Also, we need to look at how the government want you to prove that. Similarly, you can serve notice if you are selling the property, but again, you're going to have to, and we're waiting for clarity on this, prove that you're selling the property. And it may be the case that the property has to have been off the market for 6 months and for sale before you can go back to renting the property. Again, we would wait on clarity on what the grounds for that would be. If you were serving a Section 8 under those 2 grounds, either of those 2 grounds, sorry, you would have to give 2 months notice like you would do now for Section 21. And you cannot serve that within the first 6 months of that tenancy. So the tenant has to be there for 6 months, and then you can then serve a Section 8 notice under one of those 2 grounds. So you're moving a close family member in, or you're selling the property. And it would give you possession of your property because it's a stricter possession order. But again, it's still 2 months notice, and you can't do that until 6 months after the start of the tenancy. So it's going to be another good news, rent arrears. So at the moment you can serve a Section 8 notice if the tenant is over 2 months in arrears. The problem with the current procedure, as soon as that tenant pays £1, they're no longer 2 months in arrears. And the Section 8 notice is thrown out of court. So that is changing. So what they have said is if the tenant has been in at least 2 months worth of arrears 3 times within the previous 3 years, then you can go for serious rent arrears mandatory ground. And it's a mandatory ground, which means you will get possession of your property. But they have to have been in at least 2 months of arrears 3 times in the past 3 years. So again, you're giving quite a bit of opportunity there. Regardless of the arrears balance of the hearing, so even if they're up to date at that hearing at court, if they've been in over 2 months arrears 3 times in the past 3 years, you will be given possession of your property. So that's where the improvement comes in, is that you will get possession if that's happened in the past 3 years. But they will be increasing the notice period to 4 weeks. At the moment, it's 2 weeks. So if you go to court at the moment with a rent arrears ground, they give the tenant 2 weeks until they have to be out. It will now be 4 weeks. The reason why the government are doing that is because if a tenant's currently in arrears, they give them 4 weeks. If they pay it off, the landlord can let them stay. So they are raising that notice period to 4 weeks, but you have got mandatory grounds for possession now if they've been more than 2 months arrears 3 times in the past 3 years. So 2, 3, 3. Try and remember that way. So it will, and the notice is just increasing from 2 weeks to 4. But 2 months worth of arrears 3 times in 3 years, you can evict them with a mandatory ground for serious rent arrears. So that is an improvement on the current system, just not necessarily improvement in the notice period they give them. But it will mean you get possession of your property back quicker. Controls on rent increases. Now, this one hasn't really changed a lot, in my opinion. So it's saying that you can only do rent increases annually. Generally, that's what's in tenants agreement, standard tenants agreement. That's in our tenants agreement anyway. What they are putting a stop to is rent review clauses. So these are clauses in a tenants agreement where it says at the end of the fixed term period, the rent will increase by 2% or whatever that looks like. You won't be able to do that anymore. It doesn't happen very often. It happens a lot more in commercial property, but the government are putting a stop to that. They're making it more accessible for tenants to dispute a rent review. What that's going to look like, yeah, we don't know. A tenant can dispute the moment, they can take the landlord to court, but obviously that's quite costly. What they will probably do is make it more of a free court procedure, or going through an ombudsman, which we'll talk about next, about challenging a rent increase, because a rent increase can only be in line with current rent value. And they will require 2 months notice of a rent increase, as opposed to the 1 month's notice that it is now. So if you're increasing your rent at the moment, you serve a section 13 notice with 1 month's notice that the rent's increasing, you would just have to change that to 2. So it's not changing hugely. Annual rent increases, which is pretty standard. No rent review clauses, generally not in ASTs anyway. And you have to give 2 months notice as opposed to 1. So that one's not changing hugely. The next one's quite interesting, compulsory landlord ombudsman. So this is an ombudsman like the property ombudsman, which agents like ourselves have to be a part of, where tenants or landlords can raise a complaint if they're concerned over the acts of a property agent. This is mandatory for all landlords, regardless of whether you use a letting agent for tenant fine, fully managed, or you do it yourself. You will have to register under this landlord ombudsman. So that tenants can launch a complaint directly against the landlord regarding the conditions of the property, something that's gone on in their tenancy, or lack of repairs to a property without going through the agent. From an agent's point of view, it's quite a positive step, because sometimes we get stuck where a landlord won't complete repairs, even though we're telling them they have to, but we can't do them without their authority. So there's going to be an ombudsman there, which a tenant can go to directly. And they can launch a complaint against their landlord or about their property. So the ombudsman will have the power to make whatever that complaint is, good. So that may be an apology from the landlord, that may be compensation or remedial action. It can also enforce the landlord to refund rent. And again, there'll be more information on exactly what that looks like and how they're going to make this ombudsman, which is why I don't think it's going to be coming in the next couple of years. I think it's going to be longer than that, because they've got to build this landlord ombudsman and regulate that. But that is going to be a one-stop shop, is this landlord ombudsman for these tenants to go to if they're concerned about their property or their tenancy or the repairs that are being carried out. And you will have to register with this ombudsman, whether you use an agent or not. That will be law. So that's that one. So halfway through there. What's our time in looking like? Right, I'm going to whiz through 10 minutes. 7, address the delays in court proceedings. That's pretty much a statement they've made. As you're aware, court's very far behind anyway, thanks to COVID, but they're going to address the delays in court proceedings, and the ombudsman should help with that. So that's fine. Introduction of a new property portal. So this property portal, everybody thought, oh, it's going to be like Rightmove, Zoopla. It's not. The government mean it's going to be a one-stop, provide a single front door, sorry, is that words, for landlords and tenants to go down and they can see about their legislation, their rights, what they should do. And it's going to be a one-stop shop for all the legislation involved in lettings, so that landlords and tenants can go on there and see what they should or shouldn't do. It's also looking like there's going to be a list on there of rogue landlords, rogue property agents. So landlords and tenants go on and check that they're not renting off a rogue landlord. Landlords go on there and check they're not using a letting agent that's been struck off and is trying to claim or do business through somebody else. It's also saying at the moment that a tenant will be able to go on there and check whether their EPC, gas safety, EICR for the property they're viewing is up to date. So it's likely that we're going to have to upload all of these documents onto this property portal for your property. Or you're going to have to do that as a landlord. And obviously every time a gas safety renews, you're going to have to put a new gas safety on. So that is going to be a big portal for the government to build, which I don't think is going to be short done. It's going to take them a while to do that. So you're going to have to upload all your documents. There will be a rogue landlord and letting agent list on there for landlords and tenants to check. A new thing they've put under this part is you will need to provide a written tenancy agreement. And I imagine there'll have to be confirmation of that on a property portal. Obviously anything for an agent, and I'm sure yourselves have got written tenancy agreements for your property. It's just a new sort of tagline they put in there, struck on that. Working into that, so number 9 is strengthen local authorities' ability to crack down on rogue landlords. So again, this just comes back to there'll be a database provided for landlords and property agents. So rogue landlords, anybody that's gone through the ombudsman and has had a banning order and it's been struck off, either ombudsman, so the property ombudsman for letting agents, this new landlord ombudsman for landlords, there will be a list of them that tenants and landlords can actually view at the moment, because there isn't one of those at the moment, but that will be made. And local authorities can enforce banning orders, so they could ban, if there's been an issue that come up in the ombudsman against the landlord and it's been repeated offender, they could ban that landlord and that would go on the list. So that's what the strengthening on rogue landlords crackdown is going to be with the local authorities. Number 10, no blanket bans on children or those claiming benefits. So similar at the moment that we can't advertise no DSS, no benefits, the same will be children. So there'll be a complete blanket ban. You cannot discriminate against anybody on benefits or anybody with children. The government are saying that they will support those who rent to those claiming benefit. What that looks like, we're not sure yet. Likelihood is that they will bring back in direct payments to landlords and letting agents, because at the moment it goes direct to a tenant and they pay it unless there's rent arrears, which doesn't really work. So it's likely that that will change, but you will not be able to discriminate against a tenant on benefits or a tenant with children without good reason, and what those good reasons are yet we need to wait on for that one. Another big one that everybody's been talking about, tenants will have the right to request a property. So every tenant will have the right to request a pet. The landlord has to consider it and they have to provide a reasonable answer as to why they cannot have a pet in that property, or obviously say yes. What these reasonable answers are yet, we're not sure. Obviously, I've got a flat myself, which I let out, and I've got a covenant on that block of flats, you can't have pets in it. So that would be a reasonable reason why I couldn't allow my tenant to have a pet in there. But I'm sure there'll be other ones that the government will advise. What they have changed is that pet insurance becomes a permitted payment. Obviously, at the moment, tenant fee ban, we can't charge tenants, but pet insurance will come in. So it will be a bit like, because you can't charge an additional deposit, landlords can insist on tenants having pet insurance, or we can sell them pet insurance or insist them having pet insurance to cover any damage that the pet causes to the property. So I'm sure there's a few insurance companies rubbing their hands together at that one. So that's going to be the difference. You can't refuse a pet outright, you have to provide a reason why, and I imagine that reason is probably going to have to be in writing. A tenant can challenge if you do say no, but you can insist on taking out pet insurance. That would be a permitted fee, so they will be changing the Tenant Fee Act for that. And lastly, property passport. So this one again is quite an amusing one. The basic saying that tenants, which I understand, can't always afford a second deposit on top of the deposit they've already paid. Raising, £1,200 to go on to their next property when they're in one with a deposit in a DPS system somewhere else. So they're going to monitor the market activity, is basically what they've said. They're monitoring market-led solutions. At the moment, there obviously are deposit insurance policies that tenants can buy instead of paying a physical deposit. So I think the government are basically saying they're going to do something about it, but they're just going to monitor it for a bit. So I'm not particularly worried about that one just yet. We'll have to see how that one works. So that was a really quick, because I'm very aware of time, whistle-stop tour through the white paper and what it says at the moment. So I'm happy to answer any questions that I can on that at the end. So just to bear in mind, it will apply to any of you that have student lets. It applies to student lets as well as residential, unless it's a purpose-built student property. So when it comes down to these periodic tenancies, your students could be in there. I know obviously they're normally in a fixed at the moment, September to September, or whatever that looks like. It will apply to them as well. So they could serve you notice after month one if they decide they moved in it and they don't like their housemates. They could serve you notice, or they could stay there after their third year is finished for as long as they like, unless you serve them notice because you're selling the property or you're moving a family member in. So it does apply to student lets unless it's a purpose-built student block of flats. We see a lot of those in Exeter and Plymouth. You've got purpose-built student accommodation, but if it's a house that you rent out to students, I lived in when I was at uni, you will be under these new laws where it's a periodic tenancy. It's 2 months notice by the tenant and you can't serve a notice unless under those Section 8 grounds and not in the first 6 months of the tenancy. So that's one to bear in mind if you do have student lets. Expect to see the end of selling Tenancy Act documents at the start of a tenancy. So as you know, at the moment, when tenants move in, we give them the EPC, the gas safety, the EICR, the how to rent guide, and they have to sign to say they've had all of those. It's looking like they're going to end that because obviously all that information is going to be on that property portal. So that's just going to be more of a sort of data thing for us. And as I said already, there will be a database for rogue landlords and property agents, which will be benefiting those tenants and yourselves as landlords to make sure you're keeping yourselves safe. So future, what else is potentially coming? So making tax digital, we've got our webinar on the 16th of August with Andrew Brown from Bishop Fleming, who's head of tax there. He will go into that in more detail about what's going to happen. But if you do your own tax returns at the moment, which I do myself, they are going to become quarterly from April 2024. So not annually, you'll be having to submit your tax returns quarterly. And Andrew's going to be going through all these changes to making tax digital on his webinar on the 16th of August. So if you haven't signed up for that one already, make sure you pop onto our website and sign up for that one, or drop me an email and I'll pop you across because that's going to be vital for all of you. Regulation of property agents, or ROPA as it's called. So at the moment we're an unregulated industry, but they are saying that we're all going to have to become qualified. That has been going on now for at least 2 years and nothing further has really happened. We've got no implementation dates, we've got no sort of framework for that, but that could change again. New government, it could get stopped, it's not going to happen, or it could get accelerated. So it's just something to bear in mind. It's going to happen in the future potentially with letting agents. Regulation of holiday lets, I'm sure you've heard all in the news about how they're starting to stop certain areas having a certain amount of holiday lets, like in St Ives, any new builds you can only buy as a residential, you can't buy as a second home. So they are looking at cracking down holiday lets. So if you have got a holiday let, we personally don't deal with them ourselves. I'm not an expert in the area, but they are looking at regulating that industry further to bring down numbers in that aspect. So that is coming in. So that is everything I've quickly gone through for you. I'm just going to pop up my chat box now. So I'm happy to answer any questions for you. So I'm just going to have a look here. So some questions I've got through already, so please feel free to type them in the box. So interlinked smoke alarms for blocks of flats owned by different landlords. So if purpose-built block of flats, so purpose-built, all fire and smoke alarms should be interlinked. If you're in a converted flat, they don't have to be. It is recommended that they are. I've got a flat, we've got 2 flats in a building and they're not interlinked. However, we've got one on the communal floor and one on top to make sure they are talking to each other. So you don't have to, unless it's a purpose-built block of flats. If you are unsure, it's always worth checking with your local authority, because it's likely, or the fire brigade, but if you have, you should have interlinked alarms for a block of purpose-built flats. If they're not purpose-built, you don't necessarily have to, but it depends when they were converted. So it's a building reg change there. Will a landlord be able to serve a Section 8 notice if they wish to move into the property themselves? Funnily enough, it doesn't actually say on there if the landlord wants to move in the property themselves. It said if a close family member, but I would assume that yes, it does mean that you can move back into it yourself, because why would you move your mum in, for instance, and not yourself? I don't see why the government would say that you couldn't do that. But the text amendment doesn't physically say a landlord moves back in, it says close family member, but I would assume that it's going to be absolutely fine for you to do that, because it wouldn't make sense if not. Has anybody else got any other questions? Because that's the ones I've got up there, or I've got a few that came through on email to me. But I will just put up in the chat box just so everybody gets it. Let me just put that in there. So some of the questions I have had on email just before in sort of getting these webinars prepared, what will be a reasonable reason to refuse a PEC? I keep getting asked that a lot by landlords. At the moment, we don't know. Like I said, if you've got a purpose-built block of flats, there may be a covenant on that building that says that you can't have pets in the property. That's going to be a reasonable reason. I would like to think that, again, if you've got a flat that has no outside space, it's not going to be suitable for a dog, because it's got no outside space, it's got no garden. So I would assume the government are going to allow that as a reason, but that's not set in stone yet. So that is just my sort of common sense would say that would be what would happen, but I don't know that for definite yet. So when they do bring out the guidance, they will, I'm sure, set out what is a reasonable reason. Just had another question from Adrian. If kitchens and bathrooms are in excellent condition, would they still have to be replaced periodically? Not 100% sure yet, Adrian. Depends on what this decent home standard framework says. So it may say every 10 years, full stop, no matter what, or it may say every 10 years unless they are in XYZ condition, on which case it's going to be, I think it's going to be something that's going to be quite hard to monitor anyway, and local authorities are going to be the ones that are going to be in charge of monitoring this. So I imagine it will be every X years unless in X condition, in which case everybody's probably going to take a view on what X condition means. So I'm hoping that would be the way, because, you know, we've got some kitchens and bathrooms in properties that have just been maintained really well. You know, they might have had their ceilings replaced or a bit of grouting or new tiling, but they don't necessarily need to be completely replaced. So I would hope so. I would hope so, that they would have some leniency there, but I don't know at the moment. I know in social housing it's a set number of years that they do it in, but that may be different for residential. Going back to another question that I had on email, who is responsible to test the alarms on the first day of the tenancy if I use an agent? Letter of the law, the landlord is. So it's your responsibility as the landlord, whether you have a managing agent or not, to test that alarm on the first day of the tenancy. However, if you're paying an agent to do that for you, and that's in terms, or that's something you've agreed, and they don't do that, then obviously you're probably going to take them to the ombudsman because they haven't done it. So it's a little bit of this. It is you as a landlord on paper, you are responsible. But if you've paid a letting agent to do it or signed to say that they will do it, that is where I think obviously you need to be, you know, you could go to the agent and say, well, I've signed, you've agreed to do that. What I would like clarification on from the government is how we prove that we've tested those. We do it on our check-ins, or we put smoke alarm tested and working, but it's very difficult how you actually physically prove you physically tested a smoke alarm. And it would be really good if a landlord, you know, if the government could say, we want this form filled out, or we want this on the system, just so everybody's working on the same sheet there with that, because there is currently no guidance on how you prove that you've done it. We work quite closely with the local councils, especially Teambridge, who have said as long as it's written on your inventory and you've got it noted on the system that they're working, they'll accept that, because it's currently enforced by local authorities. But it would be better to have some form of clarity on what the government want. I think where the issue comes in there is a case, you know, regarding smoke alarms not being tested on day move-ins, never gone to court yet. And unfortunately, in a lot of lettings legislation areas, they only sort of tweak their legislation when it's gone to court and a judge has ruled X, Y, or Z. So I think that's why they haven't got any clarity, because it's never been an issue yet. But hopefully we'll get that when this new law comes in on the 1st of October. Unfortunately, like with the last smoking carbon monoxide laws back in 2015, they released the legislation the night before, and it's likely to be a week at best before that they bring this in. So it's going to be really difficult for us to know exactly what the parameters are until the government release that paper with the exact, release the guidance with the exact conditions that we've got to do it on. I can't see anybody else has typed any more questions, so I'm going to read through some more that I've had on my email. My property is listed and I can't do any works. What do I need to do to register exemption? So as mentioned before, we've got quite a few listed properties down here in Devon. Check your EPC. If there are things you can do below up to £10,000, you're still going to have to do them if the listing on your property allows you to do it. We also have issues with some properties that are in Dartmoor National Park because there are some restrictions there. But things like loft insulation, you can normally do with a listed property. Light bulbs, you can obviously do. Appreciate double glazing, cavity wall insulation, probably not. But you do need to be looking into other options. If it is exempt, you need to log on to the exemption register and register it there. That is landlord's responsibility. We can't do that as agents for you. Landlords have to register the exemption of their own property and provide proof. So you would have to prove the amount of money you spent, so invoices for the works that you've done, restrictions on your property, especially if it's come from Dartmoor National Park. You could say Dartmoor National Park have told me I can't do X, Y, Z, or here's the listing certificate and this is what I can't do. You do have to put on there proof of why, who, what, why, where, when, essentially. So what you've spent, why you can't do it, and so you're going to register your exemption on there. Once it's on that exemptions register, it's up to the local authorities to check it, but you would still have to do everything you can up to that £10,000, which allows you within your restrictions. You can't just register that exemption just because it's listed. So even if it's all you can do is do LED light bulbs, you're just going to have to do LED light bulbs, I'm afraid, and show that you've bought LED light bulbs and you put them up and you've had a new EPC and it's now 2 points further up on an E or whatever it may be. You're still going to have to do that. This was a good question. Can I make the tenants in my property test the alarms? No, I suppose we can't force people to do anything like that. We can't force them to test alarms. However, in our tenancy agreements here at Complete, we have in their tenancy agreement that they will test the alarms periodically. That they understand it's their responsibility and they will test the alarms. So you've got that covered. So if there is a fire in the property, the tenant then can't come back on you and say, well, you didn't tell me I had to test them. It's in the tenancy agreement. They signed it. They did. So it is definitely worth checking that you've got that in your tenancy agreements if you don't rent your property out through ourselves. So make sure that's there. Like I say, on the periodic inspections that we do of our properties, we take one of the red pointy sticks from the fire brigade. We test them all while we're there, just to make sure they're working and report back, because I imagine tenants probably aren't the best at testing their smoke alarms regularly. So at least we are then doing it for every 3 to 6 months for our landlords, and they have that on their inspection report test that smoke alarms tested and working, and then if there is any problem in the property, there is a fire, and the smoke alarms don't go off, we can actually show, well, it is a tenant's responsibility, but landlord and agent did their due diligence and they tested them 2 months ago on the last inspection and they were working. So that's just covering yourself there as well. But with us, just I would say make sure it's in your tenancy agreement like it is in ours, that it's their responsibility to test the smoke alarms on a monthly basis and report any faults to the landlord, which will be something that we will change in our tenancy agreement now. And when the new legislation comes in, that making sure that the tenants are aware that it's their responsibility to report that fault to you if it's not working. Similarly, if you're doing your own inspections, your own properties, like we have ours, we're going around checking all the dates on the smoke alarms now, so that we're able to report back to our landlords. In our CRM system here, we can add those dates on, so that we can put that on there, so we can put in our system when it's coming up to be renewed, so we can make sure those alarms aren't faulty. I've got here a message from Bob, so I'm just going to read out his question. If you need to obtain possession under the mandatory route, okay, calculate that as much as 10 weeks arrears might accrue. Can a higher amount of deposit be requested to offset the arrears? Bob, unfortunately at the moment, no. It's set still at 5 weeks. You can't charge any more than 5 weeks worth of deposit at the moment. Yes, so you could if they're the difference with it, if your tenant's 2 months in arrears, at that time you can go for Section 8 notice straight away. But obviously if they pay that £1, they're not 2 months in arrears. But if they do it again and they come 2 months in arrears 6 months later, you can do it again and again if it's within 3 years. If your tenant's 2 months in arrears, you can apply for that Section 8 notice, that mandatory ground. And if they don't pay that £1 or they don't pay any more, then your possession order will go through, from what they're saying at the moment. What this is trying to stop is where those tenants have paid that extra bit of money to stop it. And if they've been 2 months worth in arrears in 3 years, in a 3-year time period, and landlords can evict them. Now, I think a 3-year time period is a really long time if you've had tenants consistently in arrears. But what it does mean, if you had tenants consistently in arrears over a year, so they've been 2 months and then they've caught up and they've been 2 months again, and then they've caught up and they're 2 months again, and then they might have caught up, but you could then serve a Section 8 notice under that mandatory ground and you would get possession because they have been 2 months worth of arrears for 3 times in that year period or within that 3-year period. So it's a little bit of a complicated one to get everybody's head around at the moment. And until, the guidance comes out, it's very difficult to look at it exactly. But it could be the case that they've been 2 weeks arrears, but they've paid it off. But they could get 2 months in arrears and not pay it off, and you can get that mandatory ground under your Section 8 notice to get them out. But again, it would be 4 weeks notice that the mandatory ground would give. And if they pay that off in those 4 weeks, you're back to square one again. But if they do it again, you can go back for Section 8 notice again. And if they do it again, if they do it 3 times, then it will just give you that mandatory possession. So it's complicated, I'm afraid. But it is giving you more if it's a persistent arrears issue and they keep getting arrears and paying it off. It will be easier for you to get them out. Just not so easy if they do it sort of quite far apart. But hopefully that would only be for sort of personal reasons or something like that. But hopefully that answers your question. Okay. So we've got 2 minutes left. I've got one more question on my sheet. And if anybody wants any more questions, do type them in the box and I'll get to them as quickly as I can. So the last question I had in from email is, where do I need to install alarms at my property? I have a flat above a hairdresser's. So in an ideal world, I would like those alarms to be interlinked. So there's a fire in the hairdresser's, the fire alarm in the flat goes off. But the main thing to work out is that they have a smoke alarm on that door. So as soon as you walk through that front door, there's a smoke alarm on that floor where you walk in the entrance hallway, then you go up the stairs and there's a smoke alarm there. So there still needs to be one at the bottom of those stairs. Even though that's not a livable room, there still needs to be a smoke alarm at the bottom of that stairs. Just a question from Debbie. Is there a date for the 3 times in 3 years in arrears, please? No, not yet. So again, this is what the government are going to give us 6 months notice. They will give us an implementation date for when this will come in. I don't think it's going to be in the next 2 years, likely, because they've got so much they've got to build. They may bring it in stages now. And it also depends on this new government. New government might completely throw this out, unlikely. but they could do. But there isn't a date at this stage for any of this being implemented, apart from it's like, you know, it's got to white paper stage. So they're now in the process of setting this all up. The ombudsman and the portal are going to take a long time to do. So that's what's going to make the difference there. But there's nothing at the moment set in stone for when that is coming in. So at the moment, Section 21s are still absolutely fine. Section 8 notices as they are at the moment. So none of this is coming in. You can have your fixed term tenancy, so 12 months. You can serve a Section 21 notice if you need your property back without any reason. Nothing has changed yet. But when we know any more, we will of course let, you know, our landlords know for our landlord surgery. But I think that will be everything. So I'm very well, it's 8 o'clock, and I very strictly said I was only going to do an hour. I don't want to bore everybody. So I hope that's been useful to you. I'm hoping this is recorded. It should have recorded. It's showing me on the top screen it is. So we will be sending it out to everybody so you can rewatch it. And we'll be sending out to anybody who has been able to make it. If you've got any other questions, my email is obviously there on the screen, and my number there as well. So please do give me a call. If you've got any questions, or drop me an email if you think of anything, and I'm more than happy to help. If I don't know the answer, I will try and find out. But yeah, enjoy the rest of your evening. I will leave you all to it, and hopefully see you on other webinars. The next one we've got next week is with Jonathan Boucher from GA Solicitors. So that's all about Section 21 notices and evictions, so quite relevant at the moment and what's been changing with those. We've then got Mercedes from Pointers Financial on the 9th of August. So that's all about remortgaging interest rates, relevant for you as a landlord, or if you've got mortgages in your own property. She's going to give an overview of everything that's going on in mortgage world at the moment. And then, as I said, on the 16th of August, Andrew Brown from Bishop Fleming will be giving the update on making tax digital for landlords and those quarterly tax returns that will be coming in April 2024. So please do sign on for those other ones if you haven't, because they will be really useful and beneficial to you. But I'm going to leave you all now. Have a lovely evening. Thank you so much for joining me. And I'm going to stop sharing the screen so I can end. And thank you very much for coming in and joining us. Thanks then. Bye.